July 22nd, 2026, and I've been posting these videos as a form of therapy in my recovery from the trauma of watching my little brother, Paul Cairns, 62 or 64 with Down syndrome, be locked away in his group home by the British Columbia New Democratic Party government leader David Eby, Attorney General Nikki Sharma, and the minister responsible for Paul is Sheila Malcolmson. So they locked Paul away from me, his last surviving family member and visitor and person to take him out. When I discovered what I alleged to be a fraudulent and forged power of attorney the government created to give Paul the COVID-19 shot in February of 2021, I didn't find out about it for a year. They locked him away, I believe, because they didn't want me to have him tested to show that he wasn't capable of granting a power of attorney and that it was a fraud and a forgery. I know because I taught Paul to print the only word that he could ever print or read, and that was his first name, Paul. So they locked him away. I did everything I could dream of to try and restore his visits. I went to the Supreme Court of British Columbia and the Court of Appeal and the Supreme Court of Canada twice, and I was not successful. My sister, the government appointed my then 82-year-old Catholic nun sister 4,000 kilometers away in Ontario, who had moved out when Paul was born and who had only met him on a few occasions over the course of his life, and who did not understand his speech or communication, so she couldn't convey his wishes to anyone. They appointed her as his guardian, and I later found out that that was probably because she gave his entire inheritance to the government. So I did everything I could to try and restore Paul's visits. I borrowed every penny that I could for medical reports, but I was not capable of doing it. My sister, on the other hand, the Catholic Church spent, I estimate, at least $2 million, or probably more. She had 2 law firms working for her around the clock, Charles Gibson in Ottawa and Casey Deanshaw in Vancouver. Casey Deanshaw worked for the huge Canada law firm, the most disreputable law firm in my opinion, Borden, Ladner, Gervais. And he promised the judge that approved my sister's appointment as guardian that I would be able to visit Paul, but then never allowed a visit after that. Paul was locked away for 588 days. We were only allowed a 10-minute telephone call once a week, and he begged me to visit him. He said he would do vacuuming for me. He thought it was something he was doing wrong. And after they had locked Paul away, I got an email from Casey Deanshaw on April 15th of 2024, 2 years ago, saying that Paul had a stroke and I could arrange a visit through him. So they waited until he had a stroke for me to have an in-person visit because they thought that I wouldn't be able to get a sample of his signature. While I was visiting with Paul, he appeared to be recovering remarkably well. He sat up, he grabbed a book from my hand, he turned the pages perfectly, he squeezed my hand so tight when I said my name. He made good eye contact, and I was amazed at how well he was recovering. While I was waiting, my sister, when she could see that Paul wasn't going to die from the stroke, she flew in from Ontario and put Paul in a room where it was only her and him, and she would only allow me a 10-minute visit per day. During those visits, I could see that he was recovering remarkably well. While I was waiting in the hall, I got a telephone call from the Burnaby RCMP. They said that they were ordered by their Ottawa Oversight Agency to reopen the investigation into the fraudulent and forged power of attorney. And I was so thrilled. I thought, finally, somebody's listening. And I was just so excited. Now, I went to court the next morning and I asked the judge to put in abeyance my sister's authority over Paul pending the RCMP investigation. But we didn't get on. I didn't get the court order, and by the time I got back to Burnaby Hospital, when I walked into the room, my sister wouldn't look me in the eye, but she said through gritted teeth, Say goodbye to Paul, he's dying. And I looked at him, and he appeared to have been already dead, to already be dead. He was perfectly still. His hand was cool and still. His eyes were wide open, and his pupils were dilated and fixed. I've seen dead people before. Everyone in my family, practically everyone, has passed away. So I could see that he was dead. And all of his medical supports had been stripped away. He had been on a ventilator with an oxygen mask, and I believe that they had sedated him to death. He appeared to be over-sedated, and I had complained about that. There was no reason to sedate him at all. He was trying to recover from a stroke. And in this day and age, people don't die from strokes anymore. And he had appeared to be recovering. So I believe that my sister ordered the treating doctor, Michael Baker, to sedate Paul to death, to remove all his medical supports, and to kill him. When she found out that the RCMP had contacted me, she already knew she was under investigation, but I didn't find out until the previous day. After Paul had passed away, I was never informed about if there was a funeral or a service for him. I was never informed about that. And the law firm Borden, Ladner, Gervais, please remember that name and never use them. They are a huge Canadian law firm in the Pan-Pacific in downtown Vancouver. But after Paul had passed away and they had removed all his rights and freedoms and destroyed his life, then they went after me. I had practiced law for 23 years. I started out as a psychologist for the government of British Columbia, working with mentally handicapped adults, and then to try and help disabled people when I could see that they needed legal representation. I was the first single mother in history to graduate from law school in British Columbia, and then I became a federal prosecutor for 3 years. After that, I worked for Carrie Lynn Finlay, who is now the leader of the Conservative Party opposition in British Columbia, and I worked for her for several years, and then I went out on my own. I practiced law for 23 years. So after Paul had passed away, they went after me, and the nun flew in from Ontario, and they had a 4-day hearing where they had me designated permanently a vexatious litigant. It's a very rare and unusual designation which takes away all of my access to Canadian courts. Even though I had practiced law quite successfully and supported myself for 23 years as a lawyer, I can't even respond. If you sued me, I couldn't even respond. I think they were afraid that they wanted to discredit me with the police and this RCMP police investigation into the fraudulent and forged power of attorney. But they didn't need to worry because I never heard from the RCMP again. I contacted them. I asked them to treat Paul's death as suspicious. No one ever interviewed me. No one ever phoned me back. So after I had been designated a vexatious litigant, but actually even before this issue arose with Paul, I noticed that the law in Canada had changed about mercy killing by doctors. There was the reason I want to talk about it a little bit today is that at this point, more than 103,000 innocent, vulnerable Canadians have been executed extrajudicially by lethal injection as medical care in Canada since February of 2015. And what's been sort of at the back of my mind for the last several months is just thinking about my father. This is my father, Thomas Cairns. So he supported a family of a wife and 9 children working underground as a safety engineer in Sudbury. And I was his little sidekick, and he would explain engineering principles to me all the time. He had a model of a support structure in our garage, which was like an aluminum box about 2 feet by 2 feet with children's blocks held together by elastic bands with a huge pile of gravel on top. And of the box of this aluminum box was glass, so you could see the structure of the layer of children's blocks held together by elastics in a particular pattern, and then on top of that was piled gravel. And that was his system of rebar for supporting the interior of mines. He worked underground, as I said, in the mines in Sudbury. And I asked him at one point, how many lives do you think you saved by working as a safety engineer? And he said about 600. So if there was a mine cave-in, he had to run in the direction of the cave-in. And he developed this system of rebar, no cement, nothing other than rebar drilled into the rock to hold it up. And the system was so useful that the Churchill Falls Hydroelectric project, which was at the time the biggest construction project in the world, and it was in Labrador, hired him to design this interior ceiling. So this is a little bit complicated, but he explained it to me it's like a huge cavern carved out of the granite in the Laurentian Shield in Churchill Falls, Labrador. And in that huge cavern are turbines, which the Churchill Falls River push and generate electricity, and then the electricity is sent down to the eastern seaboard of North America. So if you had a hot cup of coffee today, or if you're using your air conditioning today on the eastern seaboard of North America, then you're benefiting from my dad's invention. But he was very concerned with safety and of structural integrity. And he explained to me about the biggest engineering accident probably in Canadian history was when the second Narrows Bridge over the Burrard Inlet here in Vancouver collapsed. And he explained to me that the calculations, they believed that the calculation of the struts holding up the second Narrows Bridge, where there was some kind of error in the calculation. But there were the two engineers that did that calculation were on the bridge, and they were part of the people that, I would think there were 39 workers that were on the bridge at the time and were killed. And those two engineers were killed. So safety, my dad was obsessed with safety. And I see this euthanasia in Canada, this murder, what I consider murder of innocent, vulnerable Canadians, is a safety issue. I can pinpoint precisely, and I hope I can explain this as clearly as my dad explained that children's building blocks with gravel on top to me, that it's an issue of failure, structural failure in the Canadian legal system. And this is what happened. The issue of whether doctors could kill their patients came before the Supreme Court of Canada about 20 years ago in a case called Canada and Rodriguez. It was a woman with multiple sclerosis who somebody had put her forward. There's always these groups of people that like to kill people that, they find someone who's vulnerable and they put them forward as a test case. And the Supreme Court of Canada carefully, with this charter in place, the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, which was something cooked up by Pierre Trudeau, by the way, and he also repatriated the Canadian Constitution from Britain, brought it to Canada, and there's been nothing but a devolution of Canadian rights and freedoms since Pierre Trudeau got involved with that, and then with Justin Trudeau finished us off. But in any event, there was a case that came before the Supreme Court of Canada, which is the top court in Canada, which considers cases. And it was called, as I said, Canada and Sue Rodriguez. She had multiple sclerosis. She asked to be killed by her doctor. The Supreme Court of Canada considered her rights and said no, that was not, it was not in the public interest, and it was not something that could be done, that patients could not be killed by their doctors, and it upheld the homicide and the murder provisions, first-degree murder provisions of the Criminal Code of Canada. So that's where matters stood until February of 2015. Then there was another one of these ghoulish death cult groups called Death with Dignity that put forward a woman who was already dead named Sue Carter in a case called Canada and Carter. And the Supreme Court of Canada anonymously and unanimously decided that you have a charter right, a constitutional right to be killed. Excuse me. You have a constitutional right to be killed by your doctor, and that is paid by the state. So you have a constitutional right to be killed by the state, which flies in the face of the Parliament of Canada deciding in 1976 and then again in 1999 that capital punishment, or the killing of citizens by the government, was illegal because it was irreversible. So they went against that decision of Parliament and said that you have a constitutional right to be killed by a doctor, and that me as a Canadian taxpayer, I have to pay for it. And I'm at risk of having it done to me. If I have one bad day, then I could have that done to me. I could be killed by the Canadian government. So in February, the turning point of the structural defect that upon which 103,000 innocent, vulnerable Canadians, that it's the linchpin of them being killed by their doctor and paid for by the taxpayer, is this ridiculous decision in Canada and Carter about a lady who was already dead, that she had the right, that it wasn't fair to her to make her wait until she was terminally ill, because then she might not be able to kill herself. And so that the government had to do it for her at an earlier stage. And they gave the Supreme Court of Canada, and these are the judges. I know it'll be backwards. 9 unelected civil servants hired by the government, highly paid. They probably have pay and benefits of over $400,000 a year. They decided and went against the Parliament of Canada, elected by you and me in 1976, which said the government cannot kill Canadian citizens. And since that time, since that decision, that one little ridiculous decision, bizarre decision that makes no sense to me. Now, I'm a vexatious litigant. I've been designated a vexatious litigant, but I can read. And I know what the law is, and I know you don't have a constitutional right to be killed by your government. And since that time, 103,000 people have been killed. And the government, the Supreme Court of Canada gave Government of Canada a year to come up with a guide rail system, a sort of safety net to ensure that nobody was killed in an inappropriate or illegal manner. So first-degree murder, where if you did it if you were a Canadian Armed Forces physician and you administered a lethal injection to a patient for the purpose of bringing about their death in 1999, you would have been hanged. But it's gone from that to where the government, you have a constitutional right to be killed, and the government will pay for it. And it's all in this structural defect in Canadian law of this decision by these 9 civil servants anonymously. The decision was not authored by any one judge, which normally they are. There was no dissenting decisions. So anonymously and unanimously, they reversed their earlier decision, which they really cannot do unless there's a major change in facts and circumstances. And so everybody, I posted a post on Facebook today about Dr. Ellen Wiebe in Vancouver, who boasts that she's killed 1,000 Canadians, and she's so proud of it. She had a big smile on her face. You could see that sort of Ted Bundy gleam in her eye. But it's all based on this one decision. 103,000, that's the size of the city I was born and raised in, Sudbury, Ontario. 100,000 innocent, vulnerable Canadians have been killed because of this ridiculous decision. And I thought, why on earth would they make such a bizarre decision, endangering the lives of so many Canadians and going against our 800 years of British common law in the Commonwealth. And I think I have an explanation, is that immediately after, in 2018, so this decision, this linchpin decision upon which 103,000 people have been murdered, dead, and are gone forever, 3 years later, or 2 years later, in 2018, Beverly McLaughlin, the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court of Canada, went to work for the Communist Party of China on salary in Hong Kong for 6 years. And there is no euthanasia or mercy killing in China. A doctor tries that stunt in China and they'll get a bullet to the head. And it'll be swift justice. But what China does do is enemies of the state, their political prisoners, are euthanized, and they harvest their bodies for organs for the Communist Party of China elite. So I'm putting it to Beverly McLaughlin. I'm saying to you right now that I believe you're a traitor, you're a treasonous person, and that you were persuaded by the Communist Party of China before you went on salary with them for 6 years. And she was old when she made this decision. She'd lived a good, long, full life. Nobody gave her a lethal injection. I'm putting it to her and to the police to investigate her, because I believe that she was persuaded by the Communist Party of China, for which she immediately went to work, to change the fundamental law on murder. And as a result, 103,000 Canadians have been executed extrajudicially by lethal injection as medical care in Canada. And that is the safety issue. So that is, it's like a pillar in a building, that Pfizer building in New York City on Manhattan Island. There's one pillar in the whole building that is threatening the southern Manhattan Island. One pillar that is rotten. And there was one calculation in the second narrowest bridge, the Ironworkers Memorial Bridge, that caused the bridge to collapse, and 39 lives were lost. And the one decision by the Supreme Court of Canada in February of 2015 has cost the lives and the morale of 103,000 Canadians. And one thing I want to say is that Hitler did exactly the same thing, of course. He called people that were elderly, ill, dying, and disabled useless mouths, and he had them gassed with carbon monoxide and prepared his final solution for the Holocaust of Jewish people and gypsies and gay people. And that's exactly what Canada's doing. But Hitler started that we know of in 1939. And the Third Reich, Hitler's Third Reich, ended on May 8th of 1945. So it lasted 5.5 years, almost 6 years. And Canada's gone 10 years of expanding further and further and further its murder provisions of the criminal code to allow doctors to execute extrajudicially by lethal injection. And that's what it is. It's not medical, because medical is from the Greek verb to heal. And words and wording are very important in law. But the point I wanted to make today, and I hope I've made it, is that the structural defect in Canadians' justice system and political system was the Supreme Court of Canada. And that one decision maker who went on to work for the Communist Party of China for 6 years has resulted in the extrajudicial execution against Parliament's ruling of 103,000 Canadians. That's the safety defect. And that's all I wanted to say today. Please, you can start getting the word out about this evil system. You have no idea how much damage. Canada doesn't have, as I have said from the beginning, I started making videos about this in 2021. And as I said, Hitler said that the Third Reich was going to last for 1,000 years. It didn't even make it for 6 years, because the morale, when you're killing your own citizens, and sneakily. So he started off by killing sick and disabled people by carbon monoxide, and even the German people complained after a couple of years. So he had the medical doctors like Dr. Joseph Mengele kill them with lethal injections. So do whatever you can. You know, they've muzzled me. I'm a vexatious litigant. I could fight it. I'm trying. But, you know, I'm almost 71. I need your help to bring this practice, this evil practice, to an end, because it is a threat to Canada's morale and our own sovereignty. Other countries look at us and are appalled that England, Scotland, and France have looked at euthanasia laws, and based on the horror show, the shit show in Canada, have declined to pass euthanasia laws. And it's not euthanasia, it's murder. So that's it for today. Normally I do these talks when I'm in the middle of my 10,000 steps, but it's so hot, I thought it would be a good way to blow off a little bit of steam. I love you all. Remember, be like my dad. Be like my dad. He saved my life. I was born with RH factor. My dad begged. My sister before me had passed away. She was stillborn, Mary Patricia. And my dad begged them to try and revive me. I was born dead, and they ran down the hallway. There's an underground passageway between Women's Hospital, where I was born in Toronto, to Sick Kids Hospital. And my dad ran with me, and they gave me 6 blood transfusions from strangers, people I don't know in Toronto, and that revived me. But my dad was always fighting for safety. He always said safety first. It was in his blood. And you can do the same. I love you all. Take care.